Hello everyone, Seth Mayo here again, curator of astronomy for the LOHMAN Planetarium, and welcome back for another edition of our Sky Tonight. And for this week, we're covering November 2nd through November 8th. We're also going to look at the entire month of November and just take a look at some of the highlights for this time, and also talk about a really interesting moon revelation that just came out recently. So let's take a look. A major change you'll notice in the sky, at least when it comes to our time, is that the sun will be setting much earlier, and that is all due to the recent change in our time. If you're living in a certain place in the United States or elsewhere where you have daylight saving time, the end just happened on November 1st. We fell back an hour, which did give us an extra hour of sleep, which is always nice, but it also means the sun is setting earlier. Instead of the 6 o'clock hour for sunset, now it's in the 5 o'clock hour. And this week, that will happen between about 5:30 and 5:40. You'll notice it getting darker much earlier. So it's great if you want to get out at an earlier time to see the night sky, and you get up in the morning, you'll have a much brighter day to welcome you. Probably the most notable area this week to observe is in the early morning sky before sunrise, maybe in the 4 to 5, even to 6 o'clock time frame. And that is if you're looking pretty high in the western part of the sky, and you'll see the moon. It will be a waning moon, so you'll see less and less of it every morning. So for those early morning folks, you get up, you'll find the moon will be moving through some wintertime constellations that we can find in the morning predominantly. And so starting on Tuesday, November 3rd, in the early morning around about 5:30, you'll see the waning gibbous inside what's called Taurus the Bull. This is one of the signs of the zodiac. And as we go through subsequent days here through the week, you'll find the moon will move away from Taurus in the morning and then enter eventually into the Gemini twins that you see here, and then continue through Gemini into the weekend, where eventually it will enter into Cancer and Leo. There's Cancer the crab here, and Leo the lion. And that's when it'll be about last quarter phase, when it's half full. So that's something nice to see in the early morning as the moon moves through some winter constellations and even into a spring constellation as well. Let's take a general look at the lovely celestial objects that we can see in the evening hours for the entire month of November. Early in November, we can say farewell to the summer constellation Sagittarius, located here in the southwest, which looks like a teapot, who is the half man, half horse. Now above him, and now a little bit more to the west, but still fairly high up, are the three stars of the summer triangle, which we've talked a lot about, these three stars here. And those three stars, each one part of a constellation: Cygnus the swan, Lyra the harp, and Aquila the eagle. A little more directly above us, but also starting to slide to the west as well, are the four stars here of this great square of Pegasus, the flying horse, part of the fall group of constellations. And not far from there, and a little bit more to the east, we can still see the stars that share one star with Pegasus of Andromeda, the princess. And as we slide more to the east and northeast, rise even higher up, we can see the fall constellation Cassiopeia. It looks like a W. And underneath those two, Andromeda and Cassiopeia, you can see a little bit more of Perseus, the mighty warrior who we mentioned last week. Now, if we look right along the eastern horizon, we can actually start seeing some winter constellations slowly rise here. And right where you see the moon here at the beginning of the month, you can see Taurus the Bull rising, which again is included in the winter group of constellations. And so Taurus is quite nice as well. And one more object we can look at that is getting really nice to see is in the south. We'll head back this way again. And in this area, we have a really bright star. One of the brightest stars in the south at this time of the year is something called Fomalhaut, that star right here. And this fairly bright star is part of a small fish called Pisces Austrinus, which means the southern fish. So this is a great time of year to see that star. and that small constellation as well. By the end of the month, you'll notice the western movement of all these stars and constellations I just mentioned. By that time, you'll definitely not see Sagittarius. Here in the southwest, it'll be below the horizon in the evening. But you'll notice the summer triangle is now getting a little bit closer to the western horizon over here. There's Pegasus, still pretty high up, along with Andromeda. And you'll notice how much higher in the northeast you can find Cassiopeia and Perseus, along with the winter constellation Taurus. And what's really exciting for those who really love this next constellation is if you look right along the east in the evening, you'll start to see the very bright and very famous stars of Orion the Hunter. It's probably the most famous winter constellation. For those who are interested in spotting a planet or two, for this month, you're still in for a treat. If you look over to the southwest, you'll still see the very bright planet Jupiter and Saturn, and they're still getting closer and closer to each other for that really nice conjunction that happens in December, late December that is. And we're almost there, but you'll notice it getting fairly low in that area of the sky, but still noticeable as these non-twinkling objects, as planets are. Mars is a lot higher up in the evening. You'll find it here, this kind of bright reddish, orangish looking object. It was really bright for the month of October since we were really close to it at opposition and closest approach. Now that we're a little farther away from Mars, it's not as bright, but still fairly bright since we're still in the vicinity of the planet within our solar system. For planets in the early morning, we still have a great view of the brightest planet in our sky, and that of course is the planet Venus that you find here. And just below it, but a little bit obscured by the sun earlier in the month, is the planet Mercury, the closest planet to our star that you see down here. But as we move in time, this is about 6 o'clock on the beginning of the month, but if we continue forward, you'll see Mercury actually rise a little bit higher, while Venus seems to kind of move a little bit lower in the eastern part of the sky. So for those early morning viewers, you'll have some nice kind of movement of planets, the inner planets within our solar system. There's the moon kind of joining the scene, the very thin crescent, by the 12th of this month. And you'll notice then Mercury will kind of set back into the sun, and Venus will start to slide farther down as well. In the evening of the 16th, and really best for the morning of the 17th, is the peak of the Leonid meteor shower. And that's a meteor shower that radiates out of a point inside the spring constellation known as Leo, another one of those signs of the zodiac. And so by mid-month, you'll find Leo in the early morning sky, and this is very early on the 17th. Again, meteor showers are always best in the early morning when Earth is kind of pointed sort of into the stream a bit more directly. And so this meteor shower always runs from November 6th through November 30th, so it's squarely a November meteor shower. You always find it at this time of year as Earth goes through the trail of Comet Tempel-Tuttle each year. The radiant point comes out of the head of Leo. Leo to me looks like, at least the head, like a backwards question mark or a hook, and with a few other stars kind of attached. It also to me looks like a broken clothes hanger where you only see half the clothes hanger that forms the body, and here's the head. And within the head, there is the radiant point. And like I've said about other meteor showers, this is not exactly where you'll see the meteors. It's just where you can trace all the meteors back to. Because for any meteor shower, the meteors will shoot all across the entire sky. But if you follow most of them at this time of the year, you can trace them back to this point in the head of Leo. And on later episodes, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this lovely meteor shower where you can see about 15 meteors per hour. And the last thing we can mention is the moon again. By the end of the month, on the morning of November 30th, there will be something called a penumbral lunar eclipse. And I'll just briefly mention this, but this is when the moon does not pass through the darkest part of Earth's shadow in space. It passes in Earth's secondary shadow called the penumbra. And it does darken the moon just a little bit. As you may already know, a lunar eclipse can only occur during a full moon, when the Earth, Moon, and Sun are lined up in just the right way for this to happen, when the moon has a chance to fall into Earth's shadow. And there are two different shadows, the penumbra and the umbra of Earth. So it will be going through the lighter shadow, the penumbra, and that's the early morning. It technically starts at 3:32 in the morning, but when the eclipse is really the best, or when the moon is deepest in Earth's shadow, that occurs at about 5:43, 5:44 in the morning. You might not even notice that much. It's going to be a very, very light dimming of the moon, but it will happen, and this will be located in the western part of the sky just before sunrise. So this is very early in the morning, about 5:43, 5:44 or so in the west, pretty low over there if you have a view of that. And you might see it just a bit dimming of the moon. It's not super noticeable, but we'll talk more about it later in the month when we get closer to that date. Now, something really interesting about the moon that just came about from a study that was just revealed this past October 26th, so very recent, is the discovery of water, H2O, on the more sunnier sides of the moon. Normally we think water is in the more dark, cratered zones on the north and south pole of the moon, in these permanently shadowed craters, but to find them on the sunnier side and to confirm it is a pretty interesting finding. And what's also cool is we can actually see those locations where this water was found with your own eyes, or at least through a telescope. So if we zoom in here on Stellarium, we can kind of take a look at that and show you just generally where they are. So we zoom into a nice big full moon on the 30th for that penumbral lunar eclipse here. You'll find there is this dark crater. This is the southern hemisphere of the moon, and this dark crater here, I always notice it because there's these two smaller craters inside of it that are pretty distinct. This is called the Clavius Crater, so water was found there by scientists. And then this is the northern hemisphere of Mars, where you see these very dark impact basins full of cooled lava from billions of years ago. And this particular dark blob, as I like to call it, is Mare Serenitatis, or the Sea of Serenity. We call these dark blotches mare, which is Latin for sea. And in this mare, water was discovered as well. And so quite interesting. Now let's take a look in a little more detail as we fly to the moon digitally. Now that we're in open space, we can fly to the parts of the moon where water was discovered on sunnier sides of its surface. And this is the near side of the moon, the side we always see from Earth, since it's locked to our planet, tidally locked as we call it. And so there's no true dark side of the moon, but in past observations of the moon from various missions, we found water to exist in permanently shadowed craters near the poles of the moon. So there are certain parts of the moon that have craters that are never in sunlight. And those areas could preserve water that maybe were brought down to the moon by various ways. And so we thought, okay, maybe water could only exist in those places where the sun can't basically blow away the water that is in those locations. But what was always speculated is that maybe there's some water in the soil on more sunnier sides of the moon, or at least parts of the moon that are not in permanently shadowed areas. And so what's really cool is one particular crater, again, a crater that you can see with your own eyes, or at least through a telescope, is in the southern hemisphere down here. And so here's the northern hemisphere of the moon. There is a very famous crater you can see that has really nice ray patterns depending on what image you're looking at on the moon. This is called the Tycho crater. But just below it, one of the largest craters on the near side of the moon is this one here. This is called the Clavius Crater. It's about 143 miles wide, and again, it is very distinct because of some craters within it, and these two in particular I always notice. So as we zoom in, we can get a nice view of where this water was discovered. Now that we're really close to the surface of the moon, this gives us a spectacular view of the Clavius Crater that we see ahead of us here that we can fly over. And what's really interesting about the discovery of water in this part of the moon is how it was found in the first place by using an observatory or a telescope on board a 747 jet aircraft, a NASA aircraft called SOFIA. And SOFIA stands for Stratospheric Observatory for Infrared Astronomy. And SOFIA flies much above the water vapor in our atmosphere, and water vapor absorbs infrared light. And infrared light is important for finding water because water has certain emission lines. That is, water absorbs light from the sun and then re-emits the light at certain wavelengths. And one of those wavelengths is 6.1 microns, which is the infrared part of the spectrum. And it just so happens that SOFIA can see in that part of the spectrum. And that allowed this aircraft to discover water on the moon. Normally, SOFIA is not suited for looking at something as close as the moon. Normally, they use it to look at objects very deep in space. But this was kind of a unique sort of experiment to see what you could do with looking at the moon with the aircraft, and it paid off by finding this water. Now, normally with other observatories, we found something similar to water called hydroxyl, which is one oxygen atom and one hydrogen atom, and it's missing an extra hydrogen atom, right, for H2O. Normally that has been found, and it's always been speculated that water was on the more sunnier sides of the moon, but just was never confirmed until now. And so that's what's exciting about this. Now, how this water got to the moon, or how it still exists now, is still a mystery, and there are some ideas. One idea is that the moon is constantly being bombarded by micrometeorites, and those micrometeorites might be bringing water from space down to the moon, and the water may be trapped in beads in the lunar soil, the regolith, and kept kind of preserved in those locations. Maybe the water is even in little crevices that are hidden from sunlight in this part of the moon or other parts of the sunnier side of the moon, allow it to exist there. And that's one idea. Another idea may be that the sun actually brings hydrogen to the surface, and that hydrogen can react with the hydroxyl to form water. So that's another idea as well. And so there's some different competing theories here. We still have to kind of determine what those are, but each one is kind of interesting. And when we say there's water on the moon, it's still a very small amount. It's about 100 to 400 parts per million per cubic meter. So to put that in perspective, if you grabbed all the water from each cubic meter of the surface of the moon and put into a bottle, you could fill about one 12-ounce bottle of water. So that's still a very tiny amount, but more than we thought. To put that also in perspective, that amount of water, the Sahara Desert has 100 times more in its soil. So, of course, Sahara is very dry, and that still has 100 times more. So the moon's surface is not like overly abundant with water, but much more than we maybe thought. And it's interesting that it exists there in the first place and is not carried away by the sun, which is quite interesting. The other location of where this water was found, again, is in Mare Serenitatis, which we can kind of fly to now real quickly here. We'll fly to more of the northern hemisphere of the moon as we tilt ourselves and kind of fly more northward here. See if we can navigate there successfully. And so as we get to these big dark blotches, this is where we find the other location that was observed to have water as well. And we're probably going to find it in many more places, but this is where so far the water has been discovered. And this is Mare Serenitatis that we can find here, this ancient impact basin filled with cooled lava from very long ago. And finding water on the moon can tell us a lot about how water exists in our solar system, water on Earth, and even contribute to future missions. Maybe we'll go send rovers to the moon or landers to look for this water. So there are some really interesting implications for finding water on the moon, but it is a very interesting finding and something we did not expect, but that's what science likes to do, is kind of throw curveballs at us and really show us that the universe is much more interesting than we realized. So what's great about this discovery is you can find it yourself. You can see it when you look at the moon, maybe with your own eyes or with a telescope. With your own eyes, you can definitely see the Sea of Serenity here, but a telescope may be needed to see the Clavius Crater, that you can see a little bit farther south here. And remember, it's down way far south here with those two little craters kind of inside of it there. So that's quite exciting. And there's still more observation that needs to be made, more science for this, but this is a good place to start. That's it for another edition of our Sky Tonight program. Thanks again for tuning in. And like I always say, please join us in our LOHMAN Planetarium. If you want to come, if you're in the area and you want to see a live show, it's always a good time. And we're doing shows every single day in the afternoons, and we're doing it safely. So check out our website, check out our social media for information about that. And hope to see you again next week as we look at more of the month of November and the other events that are happening. But take care, happy stargazing, and we'll see you again soon.